Hello and welcome to day 3. Today we are painting some cookies. Here's actually a little quick sample that I did before. You can use a reference photo if you would like. I found one on Unsplash that had a variety of cookies, and I kind of just picked a few that we're going to work with. A tree, a candy cane, and a little gingerbread man. Sorry, give me just a second. I had something else I was going to say. Oh, it's 2 different ones. I did 2 different versions when I first painted this because I painted using masking fluid to protect the whites of the paper, and then I did it using the bleed proof white. And honestly, I think overall I really liked how it looked better with the bleed proof white than with the masking fluid. So we're going to save masking fluid for another time. We've done a little bit already of practice with the bleed proof white, but this one is a little more monochromatic. We're using one color and then we use the bleed proof white, so we have to just use different tones for our shadows on this one. I just realized that I got a bunch of white paint when I did my splatters yesterday in my thing here, so careful when we're doing that. But so for this, we're just going to sketch roughly some little cookie shapes. Tree, you kind of want rounded edges. It doesn't need to be perfect. If you want to go with something more basic, you can even make them just round cookies. They don't have to be a shape. And I'm actually making mine a tiny bit smaller because this first time when I did it, I got a little close to the edge with my gingerbread man there. So I'm trying, we're gonna extend that a bit, to make some adjustments on this one. All right, you can see I've got I'm just making the lines, I'm making adjustments. I'll use my kneaded eraser here in a minute to clean those lines up a little bit. But we're just doing a quick sketch. And honestly, I think my little gingerbread man is probably still gonna be a little close to the bottom here, but it is what it is. It's not too bad. He might be a little top heavy though with his head. Okay, hopefully you can see that sketch. I'm just lightening up these lines. You can lighten up your outline edges a bit too so that they don't show through your paint if you want. And this is just the top of the cookie. The shadow or the edges that I add in there are added afterwards. And I'm not going to sketch those out. We're just going to kind of wing them as we go and just kind of see how it goes. Just more of a quick sketch. Okay. For this, I am actually using a slightly bigger brush. Actually, this is probably a lot bigger than we need to go. Let's go with this one. It's a bigger brush than the one we used the past few days. We're going to use this for the masking fluid, or our bleed proof white, just to get those details. But for the basic shape, we can use something a little bit bigger. So this is my Polina Bright round, I believe it's a 0. My water's a little dirty, but it's because it's yellowish in color, it's not going to matter since we're using a brownish yellow. I'm going to use this burnt sienna and a bit of the sepia to get a lighter brown for my gingerbread style type cookie. That's what these look like. So just get a little bit in there, mix a nice little pool of color. Start lighter than you think, and so you want a little bit more water in there. And just get the color you want. You can take an extra piece of blank paper to just kind of test. See, that's a lot darker than I want it to be. So I'm going to add a little bit more of that burnt sienna, and I'm going to add more water to it to try to lighten it up a bit. And that's better. That is what we're going for. So kind of a light color. We can always darken it up as we go, but if we go too dark to begin with, it's harder. With watercolor, it's always easier to start lighter and build up your color than to go too dark in the first place. And something else to be aware of if you aren't already, your watercolor is typically going to dry lighter than it looks when you first lay it down. That's why sometimes we have to do things in layers. We build up the layers. We lay a layer down, we wait a bit, and then we have to go back and add another layer to get the tone that we're looking for. All right, so we're just filling in the space, trying to keep it all a similar level of wetness while I paint. Going all the way to the edges, trying to cover any edges as much as I can. As you paint, get more water and color, and keep pulling that color from one side over. You'll notice for these I haven't been taping my paper down when I'm painting bigger, or when I'm painting something that uses a lot more water, I will typically paint it down. So if we get to a point where we're doing one that's more wet on wet and filling the paper, I may tape my paper down more. And then you can always tape your paper down if you want to help keep it still. Like right now I'm having to hold this paper here. It would be a little bit easier to work with if I had taped it down, but I didn't. And I could technically tape it down now if I really wanted to, but we're already here, and so I'm just gonna go for it. And I am just about finished. I am running out. I tend to use up my paint very quickly, so make sure you're mixing up enough paint. But okay, so there is my first layer for all of my things. And now what we could do is add a little bit of shadow to the edges of our cookies. Depending on how wet or dry they are, they may not spread very well. Yeah, that one's spreading a bit, but not too much. Just in some edges. And actually we're going to be adding those edges to make it 3D looking here in just a little bit, so that will help a bit with that. But this one I know is still wet, so we can add a bit of shadow along the edges of the cookie. That one's more dry than I realized it would be. So that's okay. Well, whoops. A little example of I was trying to pull some color in, but then I pulled in a bit too much color. So all right, we'll just wait. We'll do the edges in a minute when we do the edges. Now see, what I did was I ended up filling the whole thing with color again, because if I had left it where it was and it had gone through half the shape, it was going to leave a line because it was already dry, starting to dry, but it wasn't fully dry. And so it would have left more of a line there than I would like. So I had to kind of continue to spread it out a bit. What we can do though, even though there's still a little wet in areas, is we can start doing these edges, and we're just gonna start on the edge, and it's okay if it splits out because then it's like that shadow that we were trying to add. And we're just gonna make it a little bit thick there. Just in these areas where we would see it. So there, we've got another little bit here. And if your brush is too big, if it's a little too hard to fit in these small areas with this brush, you can switch to your more fine, your liner brush. It can be a little bit easier. Sorry, to get these details. So I needed more paint. Okay. You can see it's a little bit easier to add these edges with a smaller brush. The rounds have a nice point, especially depending on the brand. Some of them do, and you can get into those smaller areas with them, but it sometimes takes a little bit of practice. And so if it's too difficult for you to do, that is fine. It's not a problem. It's perfectly fine to use a smaller brush to get in those areas. And the smaller brush is really helpful if you like to do more detailed bits and you want to be more, well, yeah, just detailed and finer details especially. The bigger brush can help with a more loose style, and I love loose style. It's just not something I typically paint in. I keep experimenting with it, but it doesn't come as naturally to me as this more realistic, more detailed style. So if that's something you are more into, then by all means use your bigger brush and get a little loose with it. Okay, and we're just adding the little like drop shadow basically on all of the edges that we can see from our viewpoint to make it look more three-dimensional. Some areas we can see better than others. Some of this, if you don't have a picture, you're just kind of having to guess which sides you can see the best and how. I had a reference photo when I first did this, but I don't have it pulled up right now actually, so I'm kind of just winging it too. Some of the sides you could probably see a little bit better in some areas, and then they're smaller in others. When it rounds the corner, it's harder to see. But okay. So this one you can see it was kind of wet there when I added that, and so it spread out like a little shadow there, and that's okay. That is okay. It looks a little more cooked. A little more cooked there, almost burnt maybe. We can have a burnt cookie, that's okay. That's realistic, right? Okay, so before we move on to the bleed proof white, we want to make sure our tops of our cookies are dry. As we know, this one was still a little bit wet, so it's spread. We don't want that to happen with our white either, so we want to make sure these dry. Before we take a break though and give it time, we can do a little hint of shadow around our cookies, since that's not really on the main part of the cookie there, and it's okay if we spread some of the shadow And we kind of want our shadow to go kind of in these same areas where we can see the edges of our cookie. I have this where the light is coming from that side, and so where the edges are is blocking. Shoot, gotta make sure my water's getting really dirty, so I need to go get some fresh water here soon. Make sure your brush is really clean, especially if you're using a different color. That one, I still had some of that brown on there, and so some of that spread. It's okay, but it does have a different effect than we were going for, but just, there we go. Very light shadow. And then same here, there's a shadow in here and in here. Doesn't need to be too dark, we're just giving the hint of the shadow there. And if you touch into that, the color, you're going to pull some of that color away, and that is okay. Kind of gives the impression that the color of the cookie is reflecting on the white surface that it's sitting on, which is fair. That is a thing that, you know, happens sometimes. So there. Nothing over the top, just a little hint of color to just give us the idea that these cookies are not floating. They're laying on something. Okay. Now I'm going to pause the video for a bit, let my cookies completely dry, and then we'll come back and do the white details. Okay, I am back, and these are mostly dry. It hasn't been very long. I'm going to swap out and have a clean water because we're going to use our bleed-proof white, and we want it to be pretty clean. We want it to be white. We're going to add some shadow, so it's okay if it has a little bit of color. So if your water is getting slightly dirty but isn't over the top, that's fine. But we are just going to get our brush wet, dip it into the paint. You can wet it a bit, tap it off on your paper towel, and then we're just going to draw designs. And you don't have to do the same designs as me. You can get creative, make yours however you want. You can make it thicker if you want. They're your cookie design. You get to decide how to decorate it. For me, it's just easier if I stick with what I've already done. Be careful when you're going back over it, because sometimes that can add extra layers and bits. You might go a little too far. You want to try to go once and kind of stick with it. But I'm running out of paint here at the end, and so I kind of have to go back over it a bit. Okay, and we are gonna, when we're done, we'll add shadows to this, which, oops, it wasn't as wet, so I'm running out of it already. To try to make the white look like it's 3D and sticking on top of the cookie and not just a flat design on our cookies. So, all right, we'll do an eye, a little smile. Remember, try not to go over where your cookie goes over. Like, you don't want to go into the dark brown, because you wouldn't typically ice the side of your cookie, which is what that is. So you want to just try to stay at the top. And here we're going to get a little bit thicker with our lines. Okay. There, I almost started going into the side there, which I just said not to do. I gotta pay attention to myself. So I'll end the cookie right there. And it's okay if it doesn't look perfect. I mean, then it'll look more realistic, like somebody actually iced the cookie. I don't know about you, if I ice a cookie, it really does not look perfect. Maybe you're better at icing cookies than me, though. But we want to make sure we keep digging in to get some more of the paint, especially because the more you use it, and if you use too much water, the less white it will look. And so if you want it to look white, and here we go, remember not to go into that side of the cookie there. Okay. Okay, so there's our white. I will say these cookies they don't look as cooked as these ones. They're not as dark, and that's okay. If you wanted to make yours darker, you could have done another layer of the cookie color before we added our white. But since we've added our white now, we want to kind of keep it where it's at. We also want to let the white dry a bit before we do our shadows, and then we're just going to go along the edges and do some brown shadows along where the white is so that we can make it look a little more 3D, like it's sitting on top of the cookie. And actually, because I started with the cookie over here, this one is already a little more dry. I'm using the brown that I did for the cookie. I'm adding a little more sepia just to make it a darker color, more shadow-like. And then we're just going to pick some areas kind of like in the little curves where a shadow might be. Sorry, sometimes it's hard to talk and I can't. If you get into the bleed proof white, like if you're touching it, remember that it can reactivate with water a bit, and so it'll just soften your shadow color. So you don't want to go too much into the white. You want to try to get like close to it without getting into the white. And something else to be careful of that I tend to be kind of bad about is just remember where your hands are when you're painting. If you're setting your hand down to paint like I tend to do, you don't want to stick your hand into the other areas that you painted if it's still wet, especially. Like there's some, I can see a bit of a sheen there, so I know some of that is still wet, and I don't want my hand to go in there. I think I did. I did it anyway. So that's another thing. If you're likely to get your hands in the paint, you might want to wait until it's fully dry. I will say in the first one, I kind of did the shadows on both sides, but I think it makes more sense to like pick a side and kind of stay there. There's a bit of shadow on the other side too, but maybe not as dark. All right, for the eyes, just a little bit on the lower half. just a small hint of shadow. And then you can kind of blend it out. Same here. Just a little bit. But we're not outlining the whole thing. You just want to give like little hints that give it that 3D effect. All right, and I'm going to work a little bit on the candy cane. I'm going to be careful because there's some areas here that are still a little bit wet, but I'm just going to go to like one side of my stripes. I'm not going all the way down. I'm just adding some hints of lines there. Okay. And there we go. Now, if you wanted to add a little bit more color, you probably can. Just be very careful with it. You don't want to run into your white bit there, but you can kind of add in a little bit of color and kind of spread it out. Just be very careful when you're doing that. Add more shadows, but you don't want to go into where you painted the white, or it'll blend it out. So you want to be very careful if you're going to add in some more color. Again, that's something that in hindsight I should have done before we got to the white part, but I was trying to rush along. Sometimes I do that. And just you can add in some other colors in there just to make it not uniform. In general, a cookie isn't going to be the same color all over. There will be some areas that are darker than others, and it just makes it look a little more realistic. And you can even go close to that white, and then it just gives some more hints of shadow to it there. All right, but I'm gonna call that good. So there we have it. There's our cookies for today. And I will see you again tomorrow if you'd like to join me for day 4. Thanks. Bye, y'all.